son-in-law handed me a printed document the first time I tried to babysit my own granddaughter. I was standing in the entryway of their house in Clarksville, Tennessee, holding a bag of groceries I brought because I knew they'd been busy, and he walked out of the kitchen holding 3 stapled pages like he was presenting a contract at a closing. He said, "We just need you to read through our expectations before we leave Lily with you." That's what he called her. Lily. As if saying her name reminded me whose child she was. My name is Frank Decker. I'm 62 years old. I spent 28 years as a high school history teacher in Murfreesboro before I retired early when my wife got sick. My wife's name was Carol. She passed 19 months ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 weeks from the first scan to the last morning. She was the kind of woman who kept birthday cards for everyone in a shoebox under the bed, organized by month, so she'd never forget. She taught second grade for 23 years, and she never once raised her voice in a classroom. She loved our daughter fiercely, the way mothers love daughters who become their best friends somewhere around the daughter's mid-20s. She held our granddaughter Lily in the hospital the day she was born. That was 4 years ago. Lily was 6 hours old, and Carol just sat in that chair by the window and held her and didn't say a single word for a long time, which was not like Carol at all. When she finally spoke, she said, "Frank, look what they made." Like it was the most astonishing thing that had ever happened, which I suppose it was. I think about that a lot now. After Carol passed, I tried to stay present without becoming a burden. I live about 40 minutes from my daughter and son-in-law's place, and I'd come over on weekends, always with a phone call first, always keeping it to a few hours. I'd bring Lily her favorite crackers, and we'd sit on the living room floor, and she'd show me whatever she'd learned that week. A new word, a drawing, a song from daycare. She was very serious about performing correctly. It was the best part of my weeks. It was the only part of some weeks. But things had been shifting for about a year before the document. Small things at first. My son-in-law, Nathan, started asking me to text before coming instead of calling, which I did. Then he said it would be better if I gave 24 hours notice, which I also did. Then my daughter Becca started sounding a little different on the phone, more careful, choosing words the way people do when someone else is in the room and they're aware of it. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. The document he handed me that evening had a cover page. An actual cover page with a header that read Child Care Agreement, Lily Ann Mercer, and the date. 11 pages. I counted them later. It covered everything from approved snack foods and nap schedules to a clause that said I was not to take Lily off the property without Nathan's written approval sent by email at least 48 hours in advance. There was a section on communication expectations that said I was not to discuss family financial matters with my daughter when Lily was present. There was a section on gifts that said any item I brought for Lily needed to be approved by Nathan before it was given to her. At the bottom of page 10, there was a signature line. I read it twice, standing in the entryway. Then I looked up at Nathan. He had his arms folded. Not aggressively, just the way a man stands when he thinks he's handled something efficiently. Becca was near the stairs. She was looking at her hands. I said, "Nathan, this is a lot to take in." He said, "We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page." I nodded. I said I'd read it more carefully when I got home. He seemed satisfied with that. I spent 2 hours with Lily that evening, reading to her from a book she pulled off the shelf 14 times in a row, and when I left, I drove home on the highway with the document on my passenger seat, and I didn't turn the radio on. That was in March. In April, I was told that my Saturdays would need to be scheduled a week in advance because they were trying to establish more structure in Lily's routine. I scheduled them. In May, Nathan told me that Lily seemed overstimulated after my visits and asked if I could keep things a little calmer. I asked what that meant. He said he'd send me some articles. He never sent the articles, but I started keeping my visits quieter just in case. In June, I drove 40 minutes to their house for a scheduled Saturday visit, and Becca met me at the door and told me Lily wasn't feeling well and it wasn't a great time. I asked if I could just say a quick hello. She said it would probably make things harder for Lily. I drove home and sat at the kitchen table where Carol and I used to have our coffee every morning before school, and I thought about a lot of things. I called Becca the following Wednesday when I knew she'd be on her lunch break. I asked her directly, "Are things okay between us?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me more than whatever she said next, which was something about how things were just busy and Nathan had a lot going on at work. I asked her if she was happy. There was a pause and she said, "Dad, I'm fine." She didn't sound fine. 3 weeks later, she called me on a Tuesday evening. Nathan wasn't home. I could tell by the way she talked, faster, more like herself. She told me that Nathan had started bringing up money. Specifically, he'd been suggesting that my visits were costing them in ways I didn't understand, that having family over disrupted their routine, created regulation time for Lily that cut into Nathan's productivity because he worked from home. She said he'd mentioned more than once that if I wanted consistent access to Lily, maybe I should consider helping out with some of the household costs. She said it the way you say something you've been trying to figure out how to say for a while. I asked her how much he had in mind. She was quiet for a second. He said $500 a month. He called it a family contribution. I said, "Becca, does that sound right to you?" She didn't answer. That was its own answer. I told her I loved her, and I talked to her soon, and I went and sat on the back porch where Carol used to keep her herb garden, most of it overgrown now, and I tried to think clearly about what I was dealing with. This is the part I want to explain carefully, because I think it matters. In the months after Carol died, I had sold the house in Murfreesboro where we'd lived for 22 years. It was too much house, too much quiet, too many rooms I couldn't walk through without feeling it. I bought a smaller place in Lebanon closer to Becca, and when I sold, the equity gave me more than I'd expected. I'd given Becca and Nathan $45,000 around that time. No ceremony, no paperwork, just a wire transfer and a conversation where I said it was for them to use however they needed. They'd used it, as far as I knew, to pay off Nathan's truck and catch up on some credit card debt. That was 18 months before the document. I had also been paying Becca's cell phone plan since she was 16. It was still on my account, $85 a month for 7 years. I had never brought it up because it wasn't worth bringing up. It was family. But I started thinking about what family meant to Nathan, and I started thinking about whether family, to him, was mostly a ledger. I had a neighbor down the street, a retired woman named Phyllis who'd been through her own difficult situation with her son's divorce a few years back. She'd mentioned a family law attorney in Nashville she'd used, someone she described as very methodical and not the kind of person who let things get messy. His name was Leonard Causey. I'd met him once at a 4th of July cookout at Phyllis's house. He'd given me his card then for no particular reason. I found it in my desk drawer the Sunday after I talked to Becca. I called Leonard the next morning. His paralegal put me through within the afternoon, and I talked to him for almost an hour. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Mr. Decker, I want you to start documenting every canceled visit, every text, every email, every restriction you've been asked to comply with. I want dates, times, what was said, who was present." He said Tennessee has specific provisions for grandparent visitation rights. He said the courts look at whether a meaningful relationship exists, whether it's being unreasonably disrupted, and whether the disruption harms the child's well-being. He said the $45,000 might also be relevant depending on how it was characterized and documented. I asked what he meant. He said, "If it was a gift, it's a gift. But if it was given under circumstances that suggest an expectation of family relationship, and that relationship is now being used as leverage, we may have grounds to revisit how it's categorized." I called my accountant that same week. Her name was Dolores Fitch, and she'd done my taxes for 16 years. She was careful and organized, and she pulled every record related to the wire transfer, the correspondence I'd sent with it, and my bank statements from that period. What she found when we laid it all out was that I had also been consistently covering small expenses for their household in ways I hadn't fully tallied. Beyond the $45,000 I'd quietly paid for a plumbing repair they'd mentioned was a stretch. Covered Lily's first year of daycare costs when Nathan said they were between paychecks, paid for the crib and the changing table and the stroller when Lily was born because Becca mentioned Nathan had said they should wait until they had more saved up. Dolores put it all together. The number in total was closer to $58,000 over 3.5 years. I sat with that for a long time. What I kept coming back to was not the money exactly. The money was gone. Carol and I had earned it and I had given it freely because that's what parents do when they can. What I kept coming back to was Nathan sitting across from me at their kitchen table 18 months after I wired that money, telling me through Becca that if I wanted to see my granddaughter, I should start paying $500 a month. The same granddaughter I'd bought a crib for, the same house I'd helped keep from going delinquent on credit cards. Leonard and Dolores worked together over the following 5 weeks. I kept showing up for my scheduled Saturdays. I kept texting 24 hours ahead. I kept parking on the street and walking up the driveway and sitting in their living room on their gray couch and reading to Lily and listening to her tell me about her preschool teacher and her best friend who had a dog named Biscuit. I didn't let anything change in my face. Nathan would come through the room sometimes and nod at me, and I would nod back, and there was nothing in my expression that suggested I was doing anything other than being a grandfather who followed the rules. Lily asked me once during those 5 weeks why I'd brought her a book about birds. I said because she liked birds. She thought about it and said, "I like the blue ones best." I said I knew. In the 5th week, Leonard told me we were ready. He had prepared a formal letter. It outlined the documented pattern of restricted access, asserted my rights under Tennessee's grandparent visitation statute, and formally requested mediation before any court filing. Separately, Dolores had prepared a complete financial summary. The $45,000 wire, the daycare costs, the crib, the plumbing repair, the ongoing phone plan. All of it dated, sourced, documented. The letter did not threaten. It was not aggressive. It was simply thorough in a way that made clear I had not been sitting quietly out of ignorance. I put everything in a manila envelope. I called Becca on the Thursday evening when I knew Nathan would be home. I said I'd like to come by Saturday as usual and that I had something I'd like to give her. She said that was fine. Saturday morning, I drove to Clarksville with the envelope on the passenger seat. Nathan answered the door. He was wearing the same efficient expression he always wore, the one that was meant to project that things were running according to plan. Becca was behind him. Lily was somewhere in the back of the house. I could hear her singing something, one of those songs with words that barely hold together but are delivered with complete conviction. I said I had something for both of them. Nathan started to say something about how they had plans in the afternoon, and I said this would only take a few minutes. I handed Becca the envelope. She opened it. She pulled out the first page, which was Leonard's letter. She started to read. Nathan leaned over to look and I watched him get 3 paragraphs in before he looked up at me. His expression had changed. Not to anger, at first, to a very specific kind of stillness that crosses a person's face when they realize the situation they thought they were managing has been managed differently than they understood. "What is this?" he said. I said, "It's a letter from my attorney and a financial summary from my accountant. I'd like you both to read it completely before we talk." Becca kept reading. Partway down the 2nd page, she made a sound I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Not quite a word. The sound of something clicking into place that had been wrong for a while. Nathan said, "Frank, I don't think this is necessary." I said, "The letter explains what I'm asking for. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable." Lily appeared at the end of the hallway. She walked up and stood next to Becca and looked at the papers and then looked up at me. "Hi, Grandpa Frank," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Becca looked at me over Lily's head. Her eyes were wet, not because she was upset with me. I could see it was the other kind of crying. The kind that happens when something you've been trying not to understand becomes completely clear. Nathan took the papers from Becca and went to the kitchen. Becca stayed in the entryway with Lily. She looked at me and said, "Dad, I didn't know about all of it." I said, "I know." She said, "The daycare. I didn't know you'd paid all of that." I said, "I know." She said, "He told me that was covered." I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything useful I could add. We sat at their kitchen table for a long time that afternoon. Nathan tried, initially, to frame the financial summary as a misunderstanding, as poor communication, as things that had gotten muddled because they'd been so busy. But the documentation was patient in the way that documentation always is. It didn't argue back. It just sat there, complete and dated and clear. At some point, Nathan stopped talking and Becca started asking questions. That was the shift. When the person being controlled starts asking questions of the person doing the controlling in front of the third party, something changes in the room. The following week, Becca called Leonard herself, not as an opponent, as someone who wanted to understand what her options were. There were a lot of conversations over the next several months, most of which I was not a part of, and I want to be careful here because what happened inside that marriage is not my story to tell. What I can tell you is that by October, Nathan had moved out. He took his truck, which I had helped pay off, and some furniture, and he moved into an apartment on the other side of Clarksville. Becca and Lily stayed in the house. The $45,000 wire was addressed in the separation agreement. Leonard and Nathan's attorney came to an understanding. Not everything was recovered. Some of it, Leonard told me, wasn't worth the fight, and I agreed. Some costs are what they are, and you pay them, and you move forward. What I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something in the story is that what happened to me has a shape, a recognizable shape. It starts with small rules, rules that seem reasonable individually but taken together form a kind of cage. Then the rules become conditions. Then the conditions become leverage. And the person this is happening to, if there's someone who values peace, who trusts the people they love, who believes in keeping things calm, that person will accept more than they should before they understand that the peace they've been keeping was never really peace. It was just compliance dressed up to look like it. Tennessee, like most states, has grandparent visitation statutes. They're not automatic. Courts look at whether a genuine relationship exists and whether interference with that relationship is causing harm. I didn't know that before I called Leonard. I know it now, and I'm telling you because you might need to know it, and you might not have a Leonard's business card in your desk drawer. Document everything involving money in your family, not because you distrust them, because documentation protects both of you. A simple written record of what was given, when, and why takes 15 minutes and costs nothing and can matter enormously later. I did not do this. I learned what that costs. And if you are watching someone you love being gradually separated from the people who care about them, say something. Say it carefully. Say it once, clearly, without drama. But say it. The person being isolated is often the last one to see it fully because they're too busy trying to follow the rules, trying to be good enough, trying not to cause problems. Last month, Lily started kindergarten. Becca called me the night before to tell me Lily had picked out her outfit 2 weeks in advance and had been sleeping with her new backpack next to her bed. On the first day, Becca took a video on her phone and sent it to me without me asking. Lily walking up to the school doors with her backpack on, turning around once to wave before she went inside. I watched it 4 times. I'd put my phone down on the kitchen counter next to the photo I keep of Carol from a camping trip we took the summer before Lily was born. Carol is laughing at something I said, head tilted back, completely unguarded. I don't even remember what I said. Something that wasn't that funny, probably. She would have been absolutely insufferable about kindergarten. She would have made a banner. She would have cried before they got out of the car and tried to pretend she hadn't. She would have called me on the drive home and talked about it for 45 minutes, and I would have listened to every word. I like to think she saw that little girl walk through those doors. I've thought a lot about the word reasonable since all of this happened. Nathan used it constantly. Reasonable expectations, reasonable structure, reasonable contributions. And the thing about that word, when someone uses it to describe terms they've set without your input, is that it's almost impossible to argue against without sounding like the unreasonable one. That's the design. That's how the whole thing works. What I know now is that I stayed quiet too long because I confused keeping the peace with being a good person. Those are not the same thing. Keeping the peace, in the way I was doing it, just meant absorbing what wasn't right and calling it patience, real integrity, the kind Carol had, the kind I hope I've still got enough of. Isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about knowing which things are worth protecting, and then protecting them, carefully, without cruelty, but without apology either. When I finally called Leonard, when I finally sat down with Dolores and looked at the full picture of what I'd given and what I'd been slowly shut out of, something clarified, not anger. Clarity. I understood that what had been done to me had a logic to it, and that logic required me to be passive. The moment I stopped being passive, not with noise, not with the scene, just with documentation and a manila envelope, the entire structure collapsed. That's the part I want people to understand. The structure depends on you not adding things up. The $58,000, the 11-page agreement, the $500 monthly contribution, none of that would have worked on someone who was paying attention and writing things down. That's not a criticism of who I was. I trusted people I loved. I still believe that's the right default. But trust and documentation aren't opposites. Documenting a gift doesn't mean you distrust the person you're giving it to. It means you're being honest about what it is. I learned that distinction late. I'm telling you now, so maybe you don't have to. And the intelligence I wish I'd applied sooner wasn't complicated. It was just looking clearly at what was actually happening instead of what I hoped was happening. Every small shift, the shorter visits, the 24-hour notice, the overstimulation claim, the suggestion through Becca rather than directly to me, each one individually looked like nothing. Together, they were a blueprint. I couldn't see the blueprint because I was focused on each piece separately and telling myself it was nothing. The moment I stepped back and looked at the whole picture, I saw it immediately. So will you, if something in this story sounds familiar. What got me through the 5 weeks of waiting, of showing up with my car parked on the street and my face giving nothing away, was something I don't have a clean word for. Stubbornness, maybe. The kind that comes not from anger, but from being very sure of what's yours. Lily is mine, not as property, as love. And I had done nothing to forfeit that, so I sat on their gray couch and I read her books and I kept going until I had something in my hand worth handing over. She started kindergarten last month. Becca sends me videos now without me asking. That's what it looks like when things go back to being what they should have been all along.